What does it take to create a truly blockbusting idea, a product like none other? Something like an iPhone, which since 2007, when it was originally launched, has sold 1 billion units around the world. Now, for me, that's pretty staggering. There are only 7.5 billion people on the planet. And I don't know about you, but I find it really hard to imagine what 1 billion anything looks like. So I've done some really, really basic math. Please don't check this. If you stretched iPhones end to end, all the way from working, they would reach Cupertino, which is where Apple's headquarters are based in California. 16 times. That's a lot of iPhones. And I've just realised that you can't hear me. Do you want me to start again? No? No? Okay. So that's really impressive, 1 billion iPhones with that degree. But there's numbers behind the numbers, which I'm even more interested in. Because with only a 13% market share, which is what the iPhone has today, it manages to capture 86% of the profit of the entire smartphone market, which is amazing. Now, no wonder then that these big ideas, these blockbuster products, are so alluring to organizations in an era where we have shrinking company lifespans. And in an era where there's so much change and complexity and ambiguity that answering the question, what comes next, has never been more difficult. But here's a curious thing. If you go inside most organizations and poke around and see what they're working on, which is what I get to do, you find that organizations are not spending very much time at all working on blockbuster ideas. They're spending almost all of their effort, all of their resources, all of their time focusing on small ideas, incremental ideas, tiny ideas, which are important because we need them to stay competitive, but they're not going to change the game. They're not going to be the things that kind of bias this insurance policy into the future, like the iPhones. Now, when you consider that 80 to 90% of new product launches fail, you can kind of understand the reticence of executives to want to back some of these big ideas. But what I believe is the consequence of that is that we have a generation of organizations on the planet now that is literally scared to death. Scared of the future that's coming towards us and the ambiguity and the uncertainty of what that could mean for the future of the business, but also afraid of pursuing the big ideas that actually could be the salvation of the organization. Now, if you dig a little deeper, you find that the fear inside these organizations breaks down into two broad categories. The first is what I call creative constipation. It's not that we don't have many big ideas inside our organizations. They're just stuck between our ears. According to a survey, 85% of people never shared the best idea they ever had. I think that's a real shame. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that those ideas are any good, but the point is people felt that the idea was so different from what we're doing today, it wasn't something they felt that they could share. Now, there are 3 reasons why people won't put ideas on the table, I've discovered. The first is pure embarrassment. It's too different. I'm going to look silly. I don't want to go there. The second, and more important, is if I put this idea on the table and my manager says, let's do that, guess who's going to get asked to work on it? And who's got the time, the motivation, the passion, the energy to work on what's going to become an evening job on top of an already overburdened life? You know, I'm going to sit on my hands quite hard. And the third reason is we're pursuing big ideas. 9 out of 10 are going to fail. So why on earth would I put that idea on the table if it's only going to fail and then I pin my career to something that is not going to work? So 3 good reasons to keep the ideas in here. So we have creative constipation at one end of the system. But if an idea does manage to make it onto the table, and your manager decides that he's going to sponsor this and take it forward, it immediately encounters another problem, which is creative indigestion. And that is, we set up organizations to run flawlessly, flawless execution it gets called. We create widgets and we get them through the system as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and we're all rewarded for doing that. And that makes good business, it makes sense. But the problem is when an idea from the future drops into that process, there is no process for it. There are no teams available. There is no time. And the response is we chew it up and we spit it out on a regular basis. So we have this problem. We have creative constipation at one end, and we have creative indigestion at the other. And it means that there is a famine of big ideas in the system. And what I've seen is that inside organizations, you have this almost imperceptible shadow of fear cast across organizations that if you talk to companies, they very rarely own up and say it even exists. But it is there, and it's subtle, and it's powerful, and it's robbing organizations of the ability to answer the questions that tomorrow needs us to answer today. But there's good news, because there is a category of company, a category of organization that is managing to chase this bogeyman out of the building. It's a disruptive organization, a category. And, you know, some of the names are now familiar: the Amazons, the Googles, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Netflixes. And what they're doing is three things. They're bringing a disruptive kind of product to market. They're bringing a disruptive kind of business model to market. But even more importantly for me, they're challenging the ways of working that we've always used in our organizations for years and years, and yet they were designed for a different era. And they're doing different things that allow these big ideas to come to the fore. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. But before I do that, I want to share a story with you of something that happened to me in 1986. Now, it's a little bit gruesome. So if you're of a tender disposition, you might want to plug your ears because it involves a knife fight. So I was 15 in 1986. You can do the maths. And I was in the kitchen and I was hungry. I was on my own at home. And I decided I was going to make a burger. So I went to the freezer and took out 2 burgers. I'm trying to chivvy them apart, and they won't come apart. So I go to the drawer, and I get a knife out. I put the knife between the burgers, and I'm trying to jiggle them apart. You can see where this is going. And I managed to separate the burgers, and unfortunately, I separate the palm of my hand with the knife as it plunges in. So, ouch, that stings a bit. I've got a big hole in my hand, and now I'm thinking, okay, does that need stitches? Have I just given myself an infection? Remember, this is 1986. It's the height of the mad cow disease crisis. I've just put a beef-stained knife into my hand. I'm slightly concerned, but the main priority is stop the bleeding. So I'm over to the cupboard, I'm getting the first aid box down, and with one hand I'm trying to find the plasters, the Band-Aids. I'm trying to find the right size, I'm trying to open it, all with one hand, and finally get the plaster on, and I stop the bleeding. Crisis over. Now, let's take that story as a piece of customer insight, and we'll place it inside the headquarters of a plaster manufacturer. Now, before I go any further, this is not a dig at plaster manufacturers, okay? This is just an analogy. Plaster manufacturers, keep doing your great work. And don't send me any hate mail. So we go to the headquarters of the plaster manufacturer, and we assemble our best people, people who design and create and distribute and market plasters for a living. And they're great. And we look around and we see this ecosystem that is a finely honed machine for producing, distributing, and selling plasters around the world. What kind of ideas are going to come out of that brainstorm? Plaster ideas. It stands to reason we're all rewarded for doing this well. And that's no bad thing, because we need better plasters. But as I said earlier, it's not sufficient. It's not going to change the game. So now let's go and visit a healthcare tech startup. And let's see how they think about this problem. They are not going to start the brainstorm with the question, how can we sell more plasters? Neither are they going to say, how can we make a better plaster? It's not that they disregard the product altogether, but they ask a different question, which is, how can we make a better user? What do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to that blood-stained kitchen and look at what was going on. There were 7 approximate stages of things that I was trying to get done there. And at each stage, I was trying to make some progress. And the disruptive organization will say, how can we help this man make better progress at each stage? And how can we help him make faster, more effective progress through the whole process? In fact, what if we could do all of this in one stage, in one process. Now this is difficult with a handheld mic, so apologies. Use your imagination. I put my hand into this box, and it scans my hand, determines the nature of my injury, tells me whether I need stitches straight away. It then sends an email to my doctor and tells him or her what's happened. It then starts to spray my hand with disinfectant and with pain relief spray, and it covers it with a kind of rubbery sort of skin that acts as a plaster, but it's pliable and it's resilient. 10 to 15 seconds, job done. 10 to 15 seconds of helping me make progress in all of these areas where a plaster can only really help me make some progress in some. So it's a different way of thinking about the problem. It's progress, not product, or progress and product. But start with progress, it does something magical. It frees your mind from the status quo tractor beam that does this. What we do today will often limit what we can imagine for tomorrow. And so if we start thinking about progress, it frees our mind to think about a much broader range of solutions. So that's the first thing they do. They manage to focus on progress rather than product to free people's imagination. Now, the second thing they do is they reduce the odds of failure, these disruptive organizations. So how do they do that? Well, it's using the same principle. If we're less focused on product and more focused on progress, I know that in each of these stages, these are the things that the user, the consumer, cares about the most. And in fact, if we go into some detail, we can find out which ones matter most. Now, if as an organization, we decide to align our investment and our focus around the things that customers actually want to get done, rather than many of the products that we come up with that don't sell because no one ever wanted them in the first place, they're solving a problem that doesn't even exist, we stand a chance of making a product or a service that is likely to land better in the market. So in the last few years, I've done a lot of work in the music industry. And one of the things that we're trying to do as consumers with music, the progress we're trying to make, is to access and manage our music anytime, any place. That's one category of progress that we're trying to make. Now, that hasn't changed for decades. But what has changed is the technology that facilitates that progress. And with every transition, right back from 1877 to recent years, being able to manage and access our music has got easier and easier. Now, as an organization, if we align ourselves to the technology, we put ourselves in a very vulnerable position to the changes that come. Whereas, if we focus on the progress, we're somewhat ambivalent about the technology. Sure, we're still going to make awesome products, but we're much more interested in making the choice, do you know what? We want to help consumers make that progress better than anybody else on the planet. And we are going to do whatever it takes. We're going to look around at other organizations that are solving similar problems in different ways. We're going to look at the weak signals coming from the future, the new tech that's coming, that can help our consumers make better progress. And if that means a technology shift, we'll start making some small bets now. So progress focus, rather than product, helps us to open our minds to more creative, bigger ideas, and it reduces, we look at today and we take it seriously, but we hold it lightly and align ourselves with lower risk innovation. But I know what's going through your mind. This amazing auto dock, which my children kindly produced for me today, this prototype, so thank you, Luke and Leilani and Daisy. You're still going to make the thing and take it out to market to know whether anyone's actually going to buy it, and that's going to be really expensive, surely. Maybe. This is the third thing that really disruptive companies are doing, and it's become the heartbeat of their business. They're lowering the stakes of failure around innovation. So how are they doing that? Well, the first thing that will happen inside a traditional organization is that they will look at the requirement, the idea, the product, and they'll say, okay, this puts us in two positions. One, into paralysis. We stare at it for a year and don't know what to do because it just feels too scary. Or we do invest in it, we go big, we launch, and it becomes one of the 9 out of 10 that fails, and we are in a world of pain and we're running for the hills. There is a different way of working. And what that is significantly changing our focus. on what we build. So rather than spending £100,000 building a prototype, what the disruptive organization will do is take the idea and go into the future with it, with two questions. The first question being, what would need to be true for this to be a raging success? And we imagine the media coverage that's being written. We imagine the 5-star Amazon reviews, what's being written in some detail. We imagine the business ecosystem that needs to be in place in order for this thing to fire on all cylinders. And then we do the opposite. We imagine that it was the worst failure of our existence. And we do something called a pre-mortem. We try and anticipate the cause of death before it happened. And we take those two scenarios and we create a really powerful hierarchy of assumptions, things that need to be true in order for this thing to work. And we don't build the product, we run some tiny tests around assumptions that need to be true. So, anyone here got a GoPro camera? And those adventure cameras you put on your crash helmet or your bike? Well, the guy who came up with the GoPro, he didn't build a camera. He strapped a disposable camera to his arm when he went surfing one day in a plastic bag and tried to take some pictures of himself surfing, but more importantly, talked to his surfer friends to say, in context, can you imagine yourself using something like this? Got some really useful feedback, and on the basis of that, decided to take the next step. It's a test and learn approach that is the heartbeat of these disruptive organizations. We run a small test, see what happens. If it makes sense to invest in the next level, we do pay-as-you-go innovation. And this is like rocket fuel inside organizations, because suddenly the stakes are much lower. What we're doing is we're dreaming big, but we're starting small. So let's bring these three strands together. We look at progress, which creates much more creative solutions. We reduce the odds by looking at progress, and we reduce the stakes. Suddenly, executives are really excited about doing more innovation around big ideas because there's little to lose. Which brings me to my final point. Apparently 90% of us are less than enamored with our day jobs. And a couple of years ago, I was doing some work in New York with one of the big record companies. And we were looking for big ideas for the future of the industry. And at the end of the workshop, one of the delegates came up and said, this has been really great, I've really enjoyed today, but the thing that it's done for me today is to remind me why I got into this business in the first place. It deeply connected her to purpose and motivation, and I see this in every organization that I go and work in. Give people these tools to explore the future and discover a better way of working, you unlock profound motivation. So I'm really excited about the future of big ideas inside organizations, because I know that we can increase creativity, we can lower the odds of failure, we can lower the stakes of failure, and we can connect people back to the work that they most enjoy doing. Thank you.